somebody saying to me, in the event of a nuclear war, there'll be two things that will survive: cockroaches and Aston Martin.
I like that.
This is the Aston Martin Heritage Podcast with Garry Taylor.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Aston Martin Heritage Podcast. And this is a very special edition as it is going out on the 30th of December 2024. It's very special for a reason, because there was a very, shall we say, a memorable event from 50 years ago. And I'm going to have a conversation with our esteemed Trustee and Registrar of Cars, Tim Cottingham. Hello, Tim.
Good afternoon, Garry. How nice to see you.
And I think we said just before we started this podcast, we were thinking how we were going to mention this event from 50 years ago. Quite shocking, because that is when Aston Martin effectively went into receivership. The lights were turned off. And I think we used the word memorable. And it's memorable for me because at that time I was an Aston Martin enthusiast. I was a teenager. It didn't come to me from James Bond. I think it came from Lord Brett Sinclair and the Persuaders. That's all got me going. And suddenly Aston Martin were no longer. It was in the national press. What was your reaction from 50 years ago? Although you still look quite young. I'm not sure you still remember.
It's very, very kind of you to say so. I was 10. I can remember the time I heard it. Now, my family, we were not car enthusiasts. I was not a car enthusiast. I did like James Bond. I think I was with my dad going to see a Bond film, driving to the cinema. We were going to the cinema anyway. And my dad listened to The Archers, and it always came on after a very brief news bulletin at 7 o'clock on Radio 4. And the headline was Aston Martin sports car manufacturers gone into receivership. That was pretty much it. So my dad said, "Oh, that's really sad. I'm sorry to hear that." So I said to my dad, "Well, what's the big deal? Well, what does it matter?" He says, my dad didn't know a lot about cars. And he said, "Well, they're exclusive like Rolls-Royce," he said, "but faster." And I immediately had a sense of loss. I had no idea what the cars looked like, but they ticked two boxes, like exclusive, fast, which meant they were aspirational. And I'm always interested in aspirational things, nice things.
Yes.
And this was a nice thing that I couldn't possibly aspire to. So I instantly felt upset. I can remember sitting in the passenger seat. I can remember the bit of road we were driving along when this came out. It's not a false memory. And it must have left a mark, because a little while later, and the spoiler alert, Aston Martin was saved, when a particular car was launched that created a tremendous amount of publicity, the Wedge Lagonda. I was hooked. And I'd never had no idea what Aston Martins looked like until that car, but I knew the name, and that was enough.
The press coverage was quite staggering. I'll come on to some of the bits from the AMHT archive, which Sophie, the collections manager, has sent over to me. But I want to just pedal back a bit and give some context to the economic environment in the UK back in 1973 and 74. Now, I've just gone to a search engine and it's brought this up, and I seem to remember living through this, and it didn't seem as bad as it was, but my God, look at this. So it says the UK economy was in a state of contraction, where you were in a recession. The recession lasted from 1973 to 75, and it took 14 quarters. Can you believe that, Tim? 14 quarters to recover. Inflation was at 16%. There was a stock market crash. And most memorable, I seem to remember this, going to school by homework in the evening by candlelight, the 3-day week, introduced by the then Conservative government to limit electric consumption and to prevent blackouts. So that was there. We had a Labour Party that came in March 74, and they tried to increase spending and all the rest of it. So the background to the Aston Martin going into receivership, the trading environment was quite shocking, wasn't it?
Yeah, I like you. I remember the power cuts, that you knew when the power was going to go off, and they said 4 o'clock, And that is when it went
It
off.
went off, yes.
And it was this time of year. It was January, February, and it was pitch black outside. You'd come home from school. You'd got your tea down as fast as you could. We had a gas cooker. But yeah, you don't ever forget that. It didn't seem terrible. I suppose it was like exciting or interesting.
It was, wasn't it?
But it was cold. It was cold.
Yeah. Yes, I remember that, and I remember my dad being involved in the 3-day week, and I think he was in the engineering side of things, and I think he managed to circumvent it. But
well, yeah. My dad was a pharmacist, and I'm not. The pharmacy didn't close, but I also know that they had a ration book for petrol, and I've still got that ration book.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It was never needed, but the threat was there.
The ration books, they weren't going to go far with an Aston Martin V8, were they? Were 16 to the gallon or something?
No, I mean, what we need to know is that the reason petrol went up so much was there was a war in the Middle East, the Arab-Israeli war.
Absolutely, that was there.
And petrol, I mean, this is going to make not a lot of sense to a lot of people, but 38 pence a gallon when you could buy it in gallons in 73. By 75, it had gone to 73p. So if we put that into context, today, petrol went from £1.37 a litre to £2.63 a litre. Or for our American listeners, I asked a club member, CJ, in New Jersey, what he was paying for gas. And he said, it's quite cheap in New Jersey. It's $3.50 for a US gallon. Well, CJ, if you were living 50 years ago and had an Aston Martin, you'd need $6 a gallon. How does that make you feel?
That it was a challenging environment, not just for Aston Martin, for the motor industry. I think the UK was suffering particularly badly in the worldwide arena. Obviously, before then, David Brown had sold the company to Company Developments. Is that right? So that was prior to that. When did that happen, Tim?
That was very early in 1972.
72.
This Midlands company was seen as asset strippers. They were going to get the assets of Aston Martin, which was lost. They only paid £100 for it, which is pretty cheap. And there were land and there were assets, and they thought they could make a go of it or make some money anyway. But actually, whilst at the time they were seen as bad guys, they were just going to sell off the stuff to recoup some money. They got bewitched by Aston Martin like everybody else does. And, they made a really good go of it. The revised V8 that came out in early 1972, that was already locked. The design of that was locked in under David Brown.
So moving from 4 headlights to 2?
The two headlights, that was signed off by...
That was the most obvious change.
I mean, that lasted till 1989. A really small feature, I always really like this. The GKN wheel that they had in the 70s and 1980s? So with the DBS V8, that had a DB in the middle. And of course, when Company Developments took over, they couldn't use DB because that was owned by the David Brown Corporation. So the cars were renamed, the Aston Martin V8 and the Aston Martin Vantage. And they changed the wheel centre badge. And it looks like an entwined W or an M or something like that. And that badge lasted until the mid-1980s.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's William Wilson. So he was the managing director and chairman of Aston Martin. So the DB was dropped from the wheel centre badge and it was a WW. What was funny is the DB was dropped, but the WW lasted till the mid-1980s, a whole decade.
Really?
After Company Developments sold the company or went into receivership.
That's fascinating, but they carried on using the winged David Brown Aston Martin badges for the bonnet, didn't they?
Yes, they had a number of badges that they wanted to use up. So certainly the first 18 non-David Brown Aston Martins had David Brown badges, and certainly the side flashes as well. They used all of those up. Interestingly, and this catches a lot of people out when they see them, cars from 1972, 73 and 74 that were sold in Japan carried on with a DB in the chassis number. because it avoided having to homologate a new car. So sometimes you see 1973 or 74 V8s being described as DBS V8s, but they're not. They just happen to use a unique Japanese chassis number prefix.
In 1974, what were Aston Martin producing? What were they making? They brought out a Lagonda, didn't they?
Yes, that was launched for the October 1974 motor show. It's a really interesting car. It's a 4-door version of the V8, like a stretched V8. We're led to believe, and I think it's true, when William Townes designed the V8 that we know, he did 2 cars, a long wheelbase, and then cut a bit out the middle, got rid of the back doors and made the coupe. And he did it that way round. It wasn't a stretched design. It was made as a 4-door, or designed as a 4-door and made as a 2-door. So the 4-door Lagonda, David Brown had one, a DBS V8 Lagonda. That was unique. And then William Wilson decided to relaunch the Lagonda brand and brought out the 4-door V8 Lagonda Saloon. That was shown at the October Motor Show. They managed to shift 4 of those before the receivers were called in. I looked at the sales ledger. The very last one of those was delivered the day after the receivers came in.
Oh,
so
really?
somebody had gone in there and said, well, hang on a minute, is my car finished? Yes, it is, sir. Right, can I take it?
Well, the writing must have been on the wall, but October Motor Show, Earl's Court, presumably.
Yeah.
And then it went into receivership 6-8 weeks later. It's probably the last throw of the dice. I don't know.
I mean, also something that's in the collection, which I'm really quite fond of. I have a 1974 Aston Martin Lagonda Christmas card, wishing everybody, customers and dealers, happy Christmas for 1974, and it was never sent. I bet the middle of December they're thinking, should we buy some stamps?
Yeah.
No, probably not. I picked it up on eBay many years ago. I think it's a sweet little item.
It is, actually. You sent me a picture of it. Is this the one that says the latest of a long line, the Lagonda? Aston Martin Lagonda 1974. Best wishes for Christmas and the New Year. That is a lovely thing. I think we try and put a picture of that on the website if we made him.
Yeah, that's William Wilson's personal car. I mean, all of those V8 Lagondas survive, every single one.
Yeah, very desirable now. Good looking car.
I think it is. It is. We get them at our festivals, Garry.
Yes, we do.
Yeah,
we do.
Maybe we need to get. If we have another one, maybe we should make sure we definitely get a 4-door Lagonda and make a big thing of it because it's very interesting.
I think you're right. I do like a Lagonda, but that's another podcast, isn't it?
Yep.
Let's look at it. So we have a Lagonda. We have the revised Aston Martin V8.
Oh yeah, that's a really interesting car to look at, the early V8. So the first V8 was the DBS V8. That was a really quick car, potential for 160 miles an hour, about 400 built. You couldn't get it in the States for the first year. Then you could get it in the States, and they sold 32 out of 32 of those. So, 8% of production went to the US. The fuel injection was fine, but it wasn't acceptable in America for 1972. The car soldiered on as the AMV8 with a new front with fuel injection. One managed to find its way to the US.
Okay.
So then they thought, well, we're on to nothing. We can't get this fuel injection to get through certification. So in 73, the car got carburetors and a bigger bonnet bulge. They did the 50,000 mile test, passed, and they were able to sell in America again. So by 74, they managed to sell 29 cars to the States. But it was pretty difficult because the regulations were changing year on year. And of course, each country had different regulations. It's a little more straightforward now. There's a lot more alignment between markets, and with software and things, they can make the same engine work anywhere in the world. But that wasn't the case. And a very small manufacturer like Aston Martin, having a market that switched on and off on an annual basis, That must have been very difficult.
It must have been very difficult. As you say, it's so interesting at the time because they built cars for markets. And I seem to remember when the Virage came out, I can't remember, that was in the 80s, wasn't it? 80 or something.
Very late 80s.
Late 88 or something like that. They were very proud that this was the first world Aston Martin. It met everywhere. It could, all the regulations, it all came together. Now it's an obvious thing to do, but it was a big event then, wasn't it?
If I can just mention, there's a really weird thing on the Virages sold in the States in the 1990s.
Go on then.
In Europe and the UK, whilst it was mandatory to wear a seatbelt, you could decide not to put it on.
Yeah.
In America, they couldn't risk that. So there was a track mechanism which held the belt in the roof. And after you got in, the seatbelt fastened itself. So you couldn't drive it without being belted in.
Really?
It must have cost a lot of money to develop. And you see, when you look at car Virages in the States, it's the seatbelt's very, very visible because it's across, you get in and then the seatbelt fastens itself. So you can't get away with it.
Good grief. So we have a questionable economic environment, which is in a recession. It's been stuck there for a long time. 3-day week, petrol rationing. Aston Martin had 2 cars. I guess the question is, why did Aston Martin go into receivership in December 74? I guess ultimately the money ran out. Simple as that.
It was voluntary receivership. So they called it and they've got to get the money out for the creditors. If they can save the company, then they're going to get the most money out for the people that are owed money.
With the intent to try and save the company, they went to the then Labour government.
Yes.
And they asked for £1 million. It didn't seem like a lot of money. And it's interesting, I come across a press article, again, which in the AMHT archive. It's from Jeff Courtney, our motoring correspondent. If I can just read this out. Jeff Courtney, as some of you may know, was later on was the PR executive at Aston Martin. And if we can just briefly read this out, he wasn't happy because they went to the government and they said no. Jeff has said, the death of Aston Martin is not another nail in the coffin of the British motor industry. It is another blow at the fast declining quality of the British way of life. The closure only serves as a reminder of Britain's motor industry is in decline. Demand for new cars has dropped thanks to the oil shakes and roaring inflation. There is no sign it will be revived in the future. The government may spend hundreds of millions of developing a supersonic airplane, which I assume is Concorde. Yeah, absolutely. And such abortive schemes such as the Blue Streak and TSR-2. Is that railways?
No, TSR-2. It was a fighter bomber that was developed.
Yeah. Right, Blue
It's a good-looking aeroplane, but they spent an awful lot of money on it and it didn't ever enter production.
And he finishes off by saying, it seems they can't spend a little over £1 million, about 2.5p per head of population, to save one of the world's most famous companies. And follow on, Ray Carter from Labour, MP of Birmingham, warned that the shutdown would be bound to affect some of the workers in the Midlands making the components of Aston Martin. So it wasn't just Aston Martin.
No, I mean, there were 500 people working for Aston Martin then. The receivers didn't fully shut it down. Whilst production stopped, what we now call work service, where the cars are fixed, they kept that going because
did they?
always made money. So,
work service carried on.
Yeah. The service bit on the other side of the road that carried on, so cars could be repaired. So that was no problem because it always made money.
I'm just looking through a very interesting article that Peter Sprague wrote for Aston Martin Owners Club of North America. He was referring to the impact on the day. The announcement was posted on the doors and everyone had to meet at a cinema in the town next morning. Is that how the workforce found out about this, do you think?
I think they knew by the BBC that the factory was being closed. It was really the details. Being talked about redundancy and how many people might be kept on. I mean, some of the people were able to, the coach builders, the panel beaters, were able to find work with Rolls-Royce I think it's Mulliner in North London. But of course, they had to be bused from Newport Pagnell to London every day,
grief.
which it doesn't sound a lot of fun to me. But at least they kept working.
And I believe they were able to take some of their tools. They weren't, the receivers didn't say, nope, that's the end of it. Nothing. It seemed to be relatively relaxed.
Yes, it wouldn't happen today. But it was a good thing that they were able to retrieve their tools, because they wouldn't have been worth anything. They wouldn't have been able to get anything else for them. It only seems reasonable and decent if someone's going to lose their job that they've got something to take away to start again.
The news spread around the world, didn't it, Tim? All the newspapers picked it up. The main tabloids, the Sun, the Mirror. I think I'm looking at a Sun headline here. 007 car firm goes broke, shocks workers. All production will stop, and the board has been asked by its bankers to appoint a receiver.
Not only did it affect the UK, Aston Martin even then was a national institution, which is difficult to perhaps imagine, because we know that now. Even in America, the main news anchor in the States, Walter Cronkite, I've seen old footage of him. He's reputed to have worn a black tie when he made the announcement.
Oh, really?
It's hard to believe. This was in the States. This wasn't in the UK. And apparently he never wore a black tie. And to make the announcement that Aston Martin was going into receivership, he wore a black tie.
So here was Aston Martin, a small manufacturer making 300 cars at that time, but its reach and its passion and its energy was worldwide. And this was big news, wasn't it? It was big news. Well,
people, the story goes, and I'm sure it's absolutely true, that somebody sent their pocket, a young boy, sent his pocket money in to help to save the company. The owners club did launch something to be able to save Aston Martin. They wanted to set aside a fund so that club members would be able to buy shares in the company to keep it going. And that's we have something in the collection that was published by the club that says, they're wanting to save Aston Martin and to
that's right.
People send money in.
Again, it's something from the collection. It looks like a postcard with a photograph of the Lagonda on the front, and it says, it just needs a little help to keep it going. The Aston Martin V8 is one of the great success stories of British motoring. Then it goes on about sending some money where we want to build a fund. This is from the AMOC. If you want to be involved and provide an attractive investment for your future, please write to Gordon Proctor, AMOC, la-di-da.
I knew Gordon, actually. He was a larger than life character. I really, really liked him. He was one of the very kindest men, and the first Aston Martin I ever drove was a car that he owned. He bought one of the first V8 Vantages and sold it, and then bought it back at an early Bonham's auction. And the next time I saw him, he let me drive this Vantage. I couldn't believe it.
Oh, fantastic. How did the AMOC fundraising go?
I think practically it didn't work. It didn't happen. But the fact that AMOC members on the other side of the pond were aware and did invest, we can say that the Aston Martin Owners Club played an actual part in saving Aston Martin. These were owners and members. And because Aston Martin Owners Club existed and they were members, they were aware and pulled a rabbit out the hat and took the company.
It was like, we got to do something.
Yes.
We got to do something rather than just lie down and give up. I think Jensen went down about the same time, a year or so after. I don't remember a great passion behind that. No disrespect to Jensen. There was a fantastic car. I did love the Jensen Interceptor. Come on, who didn't?
Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful car. But I think the AMOC, the Aston Martin Owners Club, with their passion and energy and drive just to generate enthusiasm, I think they played a very big part in keeping Aston going.
Yeah. If you didn't believe there were customers out there wanting to buy the product, then it was pointless taking it on. And the people that put the money in and created a new company that got production going again, they knew there was a customer base, and they knew that because the existence and the passion of the Aston Martin Owners Club.
I don't know why I'm thinking this. Was the child that sent his pocket money in, was he ever identified?
I'm not aware that he was. It would be nice, because he'd be early 60s, I would say.
Yeah.
It would be something. Maybe we should launch a campaign to try and find that boy who tried to save Aston Martin.
I think that would be lovely. Yes, an AMHT campaign. Let's find the young lad that gave his pocket money in. I think that would be tremendous.
I don't think it's apocryphal. I think it's true. There may be more than one.
But again, it shows the passion, and it reached young lads. Talking of passion, let's go back to William Wilson, who was owner of Company Developments. I'm looking at a press cutting here. Passion, he was quite furious about the lack of support, and he wanted to speak to Tony Benn, who was the industry minister at the Labour government at the time, to discuss the lack of confidence in the company. It says here, it was absolutely incomprehensible and crazy. Speaking from his Victorian mansion house in the spacious grounds of Warwickshire. Okay. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what paper this is from. Quite frankly, he's the wrong man in the wrong job. Mr. Benn occupies a very high importance in government, and we should expect him to support British industry. And then he went on.
Can I just have a small little bit of support for Tony Benn? And I'm the last person
Go on then, comrade.
Would suggest that the money was there, the £1 million, but there were conditions, and one of the conditions were that the cars that were in the States ready to sell needed to move from Aston Martin Lagonda Inc. To the British Leyland distributors in America. And that was the key thing, because Aston Martin Inc., the American bit of the company, Light Work Service, was still making money. Kill that company and hand over the assets to the British Leyland distributors.
That's it.
And that's the reason why they didn't agree on that, and that's why the money was never transferred.
Oh, okay. All right. That's fair comment, because Wilson said, and again in the same newspaper article, faced the impossible situation of being sanctioned by the government. Let's say the money was there, only on condition that we go into partnership with the American car firm Alco.
Yeah.
That it was an absolutely unthinkable thing to do, as we already have our own firm over there to sell our cars. So those are the conditions. Sounds a relatively, well, okay, what's the big deal? But as you say, it was one of the most profitable arms, and okay, we're just going to hand that over.
Yeah, they had a very loyal workforce in the States. I mean, I've been quite lucky because I've met quite a few of the survivors, and they speak very fondly of their time working for Rex Woodgate, Philadelphia. I think it was Philadelphia. Anyway, it was on the East Coast.
Just reading further on in this, Wilson, head of company developments, he admitted, I have failed. I hope to put Aston Martin back on its feet and make it a viable company, but this has proved impossible, and I must regard myself a failure for what has happened. That's quite emotional words, isn't it?
It is. It's just not founded. William Wilson had no...
Yeah, I was going to say, 50 years on, can we look back on this and readjust?
Yeah. You have to. The economic situation at the time, the price of fuel, and the on-off sale of cars in America, that was what he was up against, because the company did at one point during their ownership turn a profit. It was completely outside forces. I don't believe that he played any negative part in it.
It was worldwide UK problems, and I think he tried his best. So hopefully 50 years on, I think we can look back and William Wilson tried his best. But work service kept the services side going, because Aston Martins that were still in existence still needed to be serviced, and the receivers recognised that, at least try to keep something going.
Yeah, they kept service going, but also the cars that were near completion from the production line were finished off in the customer service division, and we know from looking at the sales ledgers that cars were delivered through the first few months of 1975 as they were finished off. because the receivers, they want to get the most money for the creditors. They've got, in effect, brand new cars to sell with customers that wanted them. They sold them. I mean, new cars weren't being started, but those that were a good wave through being built were finished and sold. I mean, the people that did go on to say of Aston Martin, those people that were allowed into the dormant production side of the factory, apparently saw a car they wanted and wrote their name in the dust, saying,
Right.
well, if that one gets finished, I would like that very much. And that must have reassured the receivers that it really was worth saving, and selling the company was a very good thing to do if they could sell the cars.
So we are going to cover later on about the saving of Aston Martin. That was later in the year, and I believe that was in June 75 or thereabouts,
Yes,
wasn't it?
They formed a new company, Aston Martin Lagonda, brackets, 1975, close brackets, limited.
Yes, I remember the posters. I've got some posters in the office. The brown V8 on the beach, or a gravel background, and the Volante. The red Volante, and it's got Aston Martin brackets 1975 limited.
Yeah,
that's
well. Once the company was saved, I think the 5 years after that, they did make some very exciting cars.
They did, didn't they?
They were variations on a theme, which is more straightforward than designing a new car. But these cars were very popular. Things like the Volante, which the Americans wanted very much.
They've often asked for that, didn't they?
Yes. The V8 Vantage, which was the fastest car of its era. And it was just a souped up V8. If we in crude terms, it was very cleverly engineered. But that was a real headline grabber for relatively little money. And then the Wedge Lagonda, which did cost a lot of money to develop, but again, was a startling car. It was a car I would call unobtainium. That was the Valkyrie of its day. It really was. There was no way a 10-year-old schoolboy could have ever dreamt of affording one of those. This was a car of the future. This was the sort. You and I probably watched Tomorrow's World.
Yes.
Younger people won't remember that. This was one of the most important programs on the BBC in the 1970s. This told you about the future as it was being developed. I thought that program was terrific, and the Wedge Lagonda was the car for Tomorrow's World, and it did appear.
So let's end on a high. Aston Martin was saved. There we go. Spoiler alert. And another podcast in 2025. It'd be great to have you again, Tim, if that's okay, looking at some of the key players that a consortium that came together that saved Aston Martin onto great things. So let's talk about those key players and bring those together and see how Aston Martin rose again after this very memorable dark time.
Yeah, I very much look forward to it, Garry.
Tim, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a great new year.
Oh, thank you very much, and a happy new year to you, Garry.
Pleasure. Bye.
Goodbye.
You're listening to the Aston Martin Heritage Podcast. Discover more about the story of Aston Martin, the cars, the people, the history with the Aston Martin Heritage Trust. You're always welcome to visit us at our museum in Oxfordshire, so find out more via amht.org.uk.